Hey guys, it's Lewis from Recycle Bicycle Sales here. In today's video, we're going to talk about mountain bike geometry and how it should impact which bike you buy. So first of all, what is geometry? Well, geometry is talking about the angles that the different tubes are connecting to change how the bike sits. There's lots of different areas where different tubes are connected and they're all connected at slightly different angles and they're going to change the characteristics of the bike. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So the geometry is the main factor that will change the handling of the bike. So if you're a mountain biker or considering becoming a mountain biker, you already know that in the market space and all these manufacturers are saying that you need this geometry and you need that head angle and degrees here and degrees there. It all sounds like jargon. What does it actually mean? That's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's video. What do you need for the goals that you're trying to hit? The most common things that we're going to talk about here are the head tube angle, the seat tube angle, the reach, and the wheelbase. So let's break them down and teach you more about each of them. Head tube angle is the first thing I want to talk about. The head tube is this part at the very front of the bike that the forks go through and it's connected to sort of the headset area. So we're talking about the angle that that fork sits on. So let's talk about the head angle first. In modern mountain biking, when we talk about a slack head angle, we're usually talking about a 63 to 65 degree head angle. Whereas if we were talking about it being a steep head angle, we're usually talking about it being 65 or above. But what does that actually mean? That's just numbers. Let's talk about it. So when I'm saying the word slack and I'm saying steep, what I'm talking about is the actual angle that that fork is sitting on, the head tube. If I was to call it slack, the angle of the fork would be angled back like that. So it's almost pointing a little bit forward, kind of like almost like a monster truck effect. You can just smash through rocks and it can handle everything. Whereas if we were to go to a steep head angle, it's pointing a little bit more straight up and down. That's gonna help you fine tune exactly where you need to point the bike. So what you'll find is that if you have a slack head angle, it's really good for downhill, that whole sort of monster truck effect. You're able to just smash through rocks and it can handle quite a bit of abuse. Whereas if we were to go to one of those steeper head angles, it means that it's going to be a little bit more sort of cross-country focused, a bit more lightweight bike, a bit more you have to ride back up the hill on the other side sort of thing. It'll make it a little bit easier to just be an all-round bike rather than being a dedicated smash it down the hill sort of bike. So what I'm saying here is slack means stable at high speed and steep means easy to control at lower speed. Now let's talk about seat tube. The seat tube is the part here that the seat post sits inside. We can have some that are quite steep and that are quite slack. I'm going to say that the number here is 76 degrees. If it's above 76 degrees, I would say that's quite a steep seat tube, whereas if it's below 76 degrees, that's considered quite a slack seat tube. A lot of what I was saying with the head tube angle, the slack and the steep, is very translatable across to the seat tube as well. If you've got a steep seat tube, it's usually more of a cross-country bike, whereas if you've got a slacker seat tube, that's more common for aggressive downhill bikes and enduro and that sort of thing. So what we'll find is that a steeper seat tube is really popular for climbing and for cross country and that sort of thing, whereas a slacker seat tube is a bit more of a downhill style, a bit more aggressive. But as trends tend to be going these days, a lot of bikes are coming with a steeper seat tube so that we can change the reach and change sort of how the rest of the bike feels. It's a trend that tends to be going around at the moment. If we look specifically at enduro bikes, they're typically known for having a very slack head tube angle, and they used to have a very slack seat tube angle. But in today's market, a trend that we're seeing come along is that they tend to have a bit more of a steeper seat tube angle so that we can change the way that the bike feels. A lot of these enduro bike riders are smashing down the hill, treating them as they would their downhill bike, but they still want to be able to pedal up the other side of the hill because that's what enduro is as opposed to downhill. They still have to ride back up the hill. So if they have the slack head tube angle, it feels like a downhill bike. But if they have the steep seat tube angle, it feels a bit more like a cross-country bike. So it's able to sort of marry the two together, which is perfect for enduro. The next thing I want to talk about is the reach. The reach is, if we were to draw in our mind an imaginary line from the bottom bracket, the middle of the cranks, straight up, and it probably comes to roughly here maybe, it's the distance from here to where the handlebars actually are. That's the reach. The reach is something that is usually proportional to the frame size we're looking at. If you've got an extra large frame, it's probably quite long. If you've got an extra small frame, it's probably quite short. So it's not the sort of thing that we sort of expect to make too many changes, I suppose, but it is something that a lot of manufacturers like to talk about. If you've got a long reach, it tends to make the bike feel quite stable, especially at high speeds as well. It doesn't feel jittery, like it's moving all over the place. But if it's quite short, it might feel a little bit more like punchy and sort of zippy around the place. The final one that I want to talk about here is the wheelbase. In my opinion, the wheelbase is something that's going to change quite a bit about how the bike feels. The wheelbase is the distance, usually measured in millimeters, or at least here in Australia it's millimeters. It's probably inches somewhere else in the world. The wheelbase is the distance from the center of the front hub to the center of the rear hub, and that distance across there. So if you have a long wheelbase, it tends to make the bike also feel a little bit more stable, similar to what we had about the Reach as well. A longer wheelbase is really common on these aggressive downhill bikes where they're smashing over rocks, zigzagging and trees and roots and that kind of thing. Whereas on a cross-country bike where you've got to duck around a tree, pedaling up a steep hill and going quite slowly, they might have a slightly shorter wheelbase so that they're a little bit more maneuverable. One is not necessarily better than the other, they've just got different characteristics about them. So as you've already probably picked up on throughout this video, there's different geometry for different riding styles. If you're racing downhill and doing jumps and skids and that kind of thing, you might choose a bike that feels bigger and longer and slacker and that kind of thing. But if you're spending a lot of time trying to ride up the hill and get your KOMs going up the fire track or something, you might prefer to have the steeper different angles there, or the shorter reach or that kind of thing. One is not necessarily better than the other, it just depends on what your riding style is, which is exactly why a lot of manufacturers of recent years actually give you adjustments. So you can change where the dropouts of the wheel are, so you can make it feel steeper or make it feel slacker, or make the wheelbase feel longer or make the wheelbase feel shorter. So you can kind of make a bike feel like it's a little bit of both types of bike. A common trend that I seem to see in the current market and the way that the future tends to look for most mountain bikes is most manufacturers are really enjoying going to the slacker head tubes, but the steeper seat tubes. It kind of means that you can make the bike feel a little bit like both bikes. You can make it feel nice and aggressive for the people that want to jump around the place and ride downhill and be aggressive on their bike and that kind of thing, but not to the detriment of being able to ride back up the other hill. So I'm definitely seeing some trends in the mountain bike market in that way. Modern mountain bike marketing will say that our bike is 0.1 of a degree slacker than last year's, or our bike has a steeper seat tube than the insert other brand here. That's the type of marketing that we tend to see these days. But I think, are we going to notice a difference between those very, very small adjustments? Maybe you might notice a full degree difference if it's, you had the 2023 model and now you've got the 2024 model, because they're probably about the same kind of bike, but they might feel a little bit different. But in those fractions of a degree, I don't know if we're going to notice it quite that much. So what you'll see with modern enduro bikes, and I'm going to say maybe 2020 and newer, is that most of them tend to feel very similar. They're quite slack head tube angles and quite steep seat tube angles. That's a pretty common trend that we tend to see these days. But if we're being honest, if you're anything like me, not racing in the World Cup downhill stuff like Troy Brosnan and Conor Fearon, I don't know if we're going to notice fractions of a degree here or there. But you can probably feel the difference between maybe a degree, but probably not much less than that. In my opinion, the slack bikes and the long wheelbases tend to feel a little bit bigger, which kind of means that they might not feel as fun. And by that I mean they're not as easy to whip around and quickly change direction, or while you're in the air flick it to the side and do a whip or whatever it is you're going to do, because they feel a little bit heavier and bigger. They feel almost like pedaling a motorbike sometimes. Whereas these steeper bikes, these more sort of cross-country type of bikes, it's a lot easier to just quickly change direction really quickly. You don't have to invite the bike to turn, you just have to tell it to turn. So this is why, if you've kept up with the mountain bike market recently, you might have even seen some brands start to go with a little bit of a steeper head tube angle so that they can have that, fun aspect, or bring back that, make it feel a little bit more lively on the bike. Again, I'm not saying that one's necessarily better than the other, but it can bring back the whole funness of a mountain bike ride. So bottom line, should geometry change your opinion of which bike you want to buy? To be honest, yes and no. Maybe try and think about whether you're going to be racing and smashing the downhills, or whether you want to be able to pedal back up the hill. But just remember that you shouldn't be buying an entirely new bike because you want to change the head angle by a degree. I don't think that's enough of a reason to go and spend thousands of dollars on a new bike, in my opinion. However, if you are already looking at buying a new mountain bike, this video might help just give you a bit of an idea about whether you want to shoot for those goals or shoot for these goals, whether it's racing downhill and doing big jumps, or whether it's being able to race your friends back up the hill and get up before them. And that might impact which bike you want to buy. Well, I hope I haven't bombarded you with too much information. And if I have and it sounds a little bit confusing, let me know in the comment section below and I'll try and explain it a little bit better. Otherwise, I'm going to say thanks for watching and we'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.